Hello, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Adam Golov, Marketing and Communications Manager at Data Conversion Laboratory, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know we will allow time at the end of the webinar for questions and answers. So please write your questions in the chat area as they come to mind. If we don't have time to answer them all, we will make them available on our website. Today, we are thrilled to introduce Joe Gelb, President of Zuman Software, and Mark Gross, President of DCL. Mark Gross is a recognized authority on XML implementation and document conversion. Mark also serves as a project executive with overall responsibility for resource management and planning. Prior to joining DCL in 1981, Mark was with the consulting practice of Arthur Young & Company. Mark has a Bachelor of Science in Engineering from Columbia University and an MBA from New York University. Mark has also taught at the New York University Graduate School of Business, the New School, and Pace University. He is a frequent speaker on the topic of automated conversions to XML and SGML. Welcome, Mark.
Okay. Thank you, Adam. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending what promises to be a very interesting webinar. We have, as our guest today, Joe Gelb of Zuman. I know Joe for many years, both as Zuman and as his company is also called Suite Solutions. Worked together on many projects. Joe has over 20 years experience helping enterprises implement, maintain, capitalize on structured content. At Zuman Software, he has spearheaded the development of advanced technology solutions for dynamic content delivery, which is what we're going to talk about today. Prior to founding Zuman and Suite Solutions, Joe was the CTO at LiveLinks, a leading provider of software and system integration service and technical product information, where he designed, implemented solutions for a number of industries, aerospace, defense, manufacturing, and high-tech companies of all kinds. Joe holds a degree in mechanical engineering from Stevens Institute of Technology. Now, while DCL's expertise is in procuring content, converting it, and making sure it's ready for the next technology, Zuman is that next technology and make sure precisely the right content gets delivered to users at exactly the right time they need it. We say even with the greatest delivery software, we say nothing happens until you have content. Likewise, when you have great content, you still need a way to deliver it. Nothing happens until you have that. So with that, I'm very excited to have Joe here, and I'll turn this over to Joe to give us some insights on how you can unleash your content. Joe, it's great having you here with us, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Mark. Thanks for the wonderful introduction, and I'm happy to be with you as well, and thanks for inviting me onto this show. So I'm going to move on and just go to the first slide here. So you should be seeing a slide coming up. Great. Okay, so we're going to be talking about content. I imagine a lot of the folks that are in the webinar listening in, I imagine that a lot of you are kind of like us. We've been in the content industry for a long time. We've been talking and living content and how to make it a better value out of that, how to produce it more effectively, how to make it more usable for our users, whether it be technical content or procedures or all kinds of different types of content. And along with you, like we've been working, in the industry trying to make, specifically the delivery of that content or making that content available to the readers much more effective. That's really our take on and where we've been concentrating our energy and for the past number of years. So really, I think the three pillars of unleashing the value of your content, meaning you're creating all this great content, the question is how to make it even more valuable. So there's three pillars. One is to provide better answers, meaning when people are looking for your content, they're generally, assuming that you're not writing novels or something like that, but people are generally coming to your content because they have an answer they have a question they need an answer to. So, so number one, we want to improve the customer experience by providing users or people, our customers, our prospects, our internal people, whatever, with immediate and personalized answers to product-related questions. And our product might be a software, it might be a piece of equipment, it might be a service, it might be a health plan, it might be insurance, it might be, it might be legal services. It could be, lots of different things. And content serves our customers and our products and our projects and everything else. We want to be able to serve our customers, whatever our product is, with better answers. The second pillar is engagement. We want to use the engagement with our content or the interactions with our content for better engagement. Meaning, I imagine that, you know, like a lot of you, a lot of our customers, and probably a lot of you as well, you know, after you turn the sale and you're working with your customers, the day-to-day usage of your products, or the day-to-day, you know, touch points with your customers are almost always with your content, your product content, your support content, whatever it's going to be. It kind of drifts from marketing and sales into this long tail, very, you know, large amount of content that you've been creating. And, you know, we want to basically get better use out of the content by, you know, using this as an opportunity to engage with our customers. The third thing is monetization, providing actionable insights that enable us to optimize our marketing, our products, our sales and support, and really using this content to help turn our operations into revenue. So the basic problem case here is that, you know, your prospects, your customers, your internal folks, they're looking for answers. So they might go to Google, they might go to your corporate site search. The problem is that often the answers are buried under piles of content. You might have manuals, you might have knowledge articles, community discussions, guides, policies and procedures, PDF files, help files, all kinds of different stuff out there on your site. Okay, and that leads to an experience which is difficult and frustrating. It's frustrating for everyone. It's frustrating for you because your content's there and people just can't find it. And it's frustrating for your users, your customers, your prospects, your internal folks, because they know the answer's there also and they can't find it either. So users are just getting lost in all this content. Content's not personalized. It's not easy to find. It's often siloed between, you know, a doc portal and a support portal and a partner portal and an internal portal and our SharePoint or this or that. It's all over the place. Often, unfortunately, it's not consistent, either from a terminology point of view, but also from a branding point of view, from a visibility point of view. It's not often mobile friendly, unfortunately, even though mobile devices have been with us for a long time. Unfortunately, not all of our content is mobile friendly, and very often, unfortunately, it's detached from the product. So all these things lead to you know, a lot of content out there. It might be great content, but it still creates this frustrating experience. So really the goal is to drive your content up what we call the content value chain. So you guys are out there making your content, you know, available and useful, meaning we want to make sure that your content is available, meaning it's covering your functionality, it's covering your services. We want to make sure that content is useful, and that's really what a lot of you guys out there who are maybe creating content or managing content creation organizations, that's what you're good at. You're good at creating good content. Okay, and more, you know, making the content useful means, you know, generally more content updates and making, you know, a reduction in the time that it takes to make new content or updated content available. The next step is to make this content more findable, meaning making sure that the search works well, optimally, make sure that people are able to find what they need. By doing that, you know, again, talking about bringing up the value of our content, that basically increases the ability to do case deflection. Case deflection basically means that instead of picking up the phone and calling support, I get the answer on my own. That's called case deflection. So I increase case deflection and I reduce the support cost because my content's more findable. I can increase my customer effort score, which basically means I'm reducing my customer effort, and I'm basically increasing my organic search traffic, which marketing people and sales people really like. The fourth thing here is engaging. We want to make that content engaging, and that drives value up because it increases the number of returning users to my site. The more that the people find your content to be reliable and findable, and that your site or your doc portal, your place, is the reliable source of where they're going to find the stuff, their content, that increases the numbers of returning users. It gives you more user feedback. Again, engaging those customers to you know, to provide more information about how well you're doing or how you can improve. And also increases the average session duration. Again, that's from a marketing point of view, from a sales point of view. It's generally good to keep people on your site. Okay, not because you want them to be stuck reading a bunch of boring stuff. The idea is that they come to your site, they read what they need, and they move on to find more interesting stuff on your site. And it drives business. You know, ultimately, having better content on your site increases your your NPS, which is a customer satisfaction score. Net Promoter Score, increases your conversion for organic content promotion, and generally more impressions on your site. The studies have been shown that the more positive interactions you have on your site, measurably higher probability that someone's going to buy something from you, either something new or upsell. Okay, so increasing those positive interactions on your website. Okay, so all these are the goal, driving your content up the value chain. We're going to talk about many of these in more detail. Now, what's nice about this is that you guys are spending a lot of time and effort and money, creating all this great content, and that's generally very human intensive. What we're able to do is, using tools like machine learning, AI, and other types of tools, we're able to get better benefits with less cost. Okay, and that really results in better product content personalization, and that really is, talking about a personalization platform, which we're going to be speaking about. Now, let's talk a little bit about the transformation into what we call intelligent content. So many folks are using what we call unstructured content. Unstructured content basically means monolithic files. They may be PDF files, they may be HTML pages, but it's basically taking like a user manual or a large procedure, okay, or a large policy, or whatever your content is, and delivering that content on a website or on a mobile device or an app or anything like this in large monolithic files. That's called unstructured content. Structured content is generally XML-based. It's assembled from reusable, smaller pieces of information. Okay, and that allows us to create a more logical structure, or change logical structure based on the use cases, and generally enables us to save costs by focusing, collecting metrics about exactly what content needs to be updated or what's most valuable, translation costs, things like this. Oops, sorry about that. As we go up, the chain here, we're talking about intelligent content, which is really micro content, which can be granularly classified by using the taxonomy. We're going to talk about taxonomy a little bit later and kind of bring it down to earth so we understand what that means. But intelligent content, taking this modular content, which is classified properly, that allows us to get a better customer experience and monetization. It also allows us, we're looking at the left side of the scale here, that increases our ability to get more semantic meaning out of this content. And we're going to see later on in the presentation that semantic meaning gives us a huge amount of benefits from a delivery perspective, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we go forward. Okay, now all this really opens opportunities for real-time personalization, getting granular analytics about who's using, about the usage of smaller pieces of content, so you can make better decisions about what you're going to be focusing and updating. Content monetization, being able to use those interactions to for better business benefit, as we spoke about before, and also make your content more chatbot and AI or artificial, or intelligent assistant ready. We're going to circle around the back to this later on. Okay, moving right along. So let's talk a little bit more about the answers. Turning your product content into personalized answers. There's a few steps to this. Step number one is being able to ingest this content, meaning all this content you have in your source content, whether you're writing your content in Dita or in FrameMaker, or you're converting content from some kind of format, you're scanning it, OCRing it, you're taking legacy PDF files and you're breaking it down. But basically, we need to take this content and ingest it in such a way that we're able to classify it. Classify is like a fancy way of saying tag it, or put metadata on it. That allows us to be more optimized for SEO. Allows us to index this content in different ways, which we're going to talk about. Okay, so we need to ingest this content and not just uploading it to some website. We're talking about ingesting it in such a way that we can have this content classified. Classification is kind of like, you remember the libraries where you go into the library and there's actual physical books, and these physical books have these labels on them, like Dewey Decimal. Dewey Decimal is really like a taxonomy, and by putting a label on a physical book, it's really called classifications. Librarians, they know about classification of text and classification of information. So what we're doing is we're classifying or tagging our content by putting labels on it based on a taxonomy that we build that models our domain, like our stuff, our product, our services, and everything else. We're going to get into that. That's number one. Number two is personalizing that content. Once we've got this content ingested and we're able to we have a tag to a certain degree, we're able to put all kinds of rules on that. Who's able to see certain content? Who's not able to see it? Am I coming to my site from the public, or am I logging in as a customer? Am I logging in as a partner? Am I identified as an internal employee? Am I a support person? All kinds of different ways of partitioning content and allowing people to see content based on who they are and based on the profiles of our content. Okay, that's number one. Number two, based on behaviors, based on what we know about this user, customer, prospect, individual person who's come and looking at our site, based on their behaviors, how they're looking at our content, we can also personalize that content. There's number three, which is enriching this content with recommendations. So if I'm looking at a piece of content, or let's say it's a procedure, a maintenance procedure, or a procedure about, how do I file a return for some kind of a insurance claim or something, right? It can be anything. So once I'm looking at content, I can already recommend other useful content that may be coming from things like support articles or community posts, things like this, based on the tagging or the classification of this content. So we're talking about ingesting the content, personalizing it, enriching it, and all that allows us to deliver more personalized answers. So personalization is really the key to customer experience. So we talk about like a sample scenario here. I'm a service engineer. How do I install a new thing using a certain protocol and connect it to a certain device manager, etc. So anyone coming to your site or coming to your information generally has a role. They have a role in their organization. They have a goal that they're trying to achieve, and they have a context. What product, what version, which operating system, whatever it's going to be that's for your domain, right? They have a role, goal, and context. They also have an identity. And when people are logging in, either they're logging in or we're identifying them based on their profile, a web profile, or they're coming in from the public and we really don't know anything about them. That's also information. So based on what we know about them, their single sign-on profile, any explicit preferences that this person has notified us that they're interested in, or any kind of prior behavior, maybe where they're located, all that allows us to go to our information, and based on the classification, based on what we call entity extraction, okay, of the conversation or the interactions with our customer, based on different types of clustering of information and filtering, we're able to go ahead and personalize the access to that content. Okay, number one, it may be search behavior. Based on what we know about them, we can boost up the search behavior, or boost up content that would be most relevant to them based on what we know about them and based on what we know about the content. And those entitlements, the security layer, based on the content types that they might be interested in, allowing people to personally aggregate content that's useful for them, picking up these modules or chunks of content and pulling it into their own type of like collection or their own, place where they're able to keep content that they like or they need on an ongoing basis. Recommend content. We can use this for personalizing announcements, letting people know about what's happening in our company. Let's say I do a search in Google, I come into a procedure, I come into some kind of information about one of our features or how to do some kind of troubleshooting or something. I can proactively, based on what I know about this person and what they're looking at, I can proactively let people know either about a service bulletin or a new release coming on, or maybe allow them to, or maybe ask them to take a certain survey which is very, very focused. There's all kinds of information or things we can do based on what we know about the person, but also based on what we know about the content. Okay. Now, the foundation for personalized experiences is what we call a content hub, or what's called a content as a service. Okay. Now, a content as a service basically is a type of platform that allows you to ingest all different types of content. Okay, you might be writing your content in a structured format like XML. You might be writing your content in something like Confluence. You might be writing your content in HTML and something like Flare or in Word. Or you might be scanning, or you might be breaking down content that's coming from PDF. There's all kinds of content out there. Being able to ingest this, what we call this formal curated product content, ingesting that and making it available no matter what the source or no matter what the source repository is, making this available in the hub. And then we're able to put, this layer of intelligence on it, this classification, the security layer, the behaviors, the recommendations. All this feeds into the hub to allow us to push this content out or make it available to multiple channels. The channels might be documentation portal. It might be allowing this content to be available through my customer community, through my knowledge base for my support people or call center, through an AI bot, a chatbot, or maybe an Internet of Things app. Again, we're not just talking about websites anymore. We're talking about being able to serve up this content in chunks, in this intelligently chunked classified content in different channels, or even AR, which is augmented reality, which is becoming very much more important in service, in the service industry. Okay, so once we have this content and we're able to make it available in a unified hub and classified using a unified taxonomy, and get into that later on, then we're able to make this content available in a variety of different types of platforms that we're using now and that we're going to be using in the future. Now, a lot of folks might be asking, wait a minute, I already have a website. I already have a Web CMS or Web CM. Well, how is this different than a content as a service? Okay, so a WCM or Web Content Management System, which many companies, I'd venture to say almost all companies, are basing, or the vast majority are basing their websites on. It might be an Adobe AEM, it might be something like Drupal, it might be something like LifeFrame, all kinds of different types of WCMs out there. So WCM is generally focusing on combining marketing content, for authoring and delivery. So they're meant for making, for marketing people, for people to go ahead and author smaller pages or maybe, product pages, and then deliver that content in an organized way onto the website. It's not really focusing on native search capabilities. Very often a WCM system will allow you to bundle in or to integrate with some kind of third-party search. WCM is generally not really focused on native search. It's not built, which basically puts it at a little bit of a disadvantage when we're talking about the advanced semantic capabilities that we're going to need. It's not generally built for importing and updating vast quantities of structured data. I mean, if you have a lot of structured content out there that you're creating and managing in an outside system, WCM is generally not the best tool for importing all this vast amount of content on an ongoing basis. WCM focuses on mobile and responsive design, but not necessarily semantic APIs, which would allow us to which we're going to need really to serve this content to things like AR, augmented reality, chatbots, and things like this, or IoT apps. Content as a service, on the other hand, is really focused on delivering this kind of complex and structured, as well as unstructured, HTML content or PDF content if needed, right? But basically unstructured and structured content, which is authored and managed in other repositories. So as an organization, you might be having lots of different groups out there, creating lots of different content and lots of different formats, using lots of different tools. And that doesn't mean, that it should be these things should be a stumbling block anymore, an obstacle to letting all this content being, available on a unified platform. That's really where content as a service plays in. It includes high-end search, out of the box generally, so that it can be tuned and optimized for the needs of your domain-specific technical resources. Okay, there's lots of ways you can tune in a search engine. Anyone who tells you can just batch on or stick on a search engine is going to work, or maybe do some indexing. It's not reality. Content as a service is built for importing large amounts of content from the different formats. And the last part here, which is also very important, it generally includes a headless APIs, which are required to deliver this, this JSON content, which is a format that the APIs and applications use to communicate with each other. So whether it be your own applications, whether it be artificial intelligence assistants, IoT, and things like that. So these types of platforms require some kind of an API to grab content without having to scrape through a website or anything like that. So why would enterprises move to content as a service? Okay, kind of building on what we just spoke about before. Number one, entitlements and single sign-on are becoming more and more requirements. meaning not all the content is public. We need to be able to segment content in an easy way, an effective way, in one portal or one place, but allow people to get to the content only they're allowed to see on a need-to-know basis or based on their profiles. We're talking about standard searching and building in the high-end search. We're talking about synonyms and full phrase and things like this. We're talking about easy integration by other search engines, allowing other sites to be able to index this content, whether it be a public website or whether it be other types of applications. CaaS needs to be high availability and scalability out of the box. A lot of enterprises are finding that it's much easier to have high availability sites as opposed to WCM. Taxonomy management auto tagging, we're going to get back to that later on. Multiple sources, WCM, as we said before, is not able to handle this kind of multiple sources. And so a lot of companies are moving in this direction. And again, we're talking about getting value out of content, being able to take all this content in the different sources and really make it more valuable by making it allow you to find it and use it alongside and get metrics alongside and analytics alongside all this other types of content. And not having to artificially segment content based on the format, the underlying format of the source. Out of the box integrations, we spoke about a little bit. Personalized content aggregation, semantic APIs for integration with bots, and integration with marketing automation is becoming more and more important. And this is really, a list of why enterprises are starting to move over to what's called content as a service. So let's step back a little bit and talk about your content. So if we talk about the steps towards effective content delivery, so on an optimal level, we want to move towards, as possible, what we call scenario-based content. And that basically means that our content, if we're able to model it or get it or tag it in a way that we can gear this content towards user stories. So scenario-based content on the next step would basically be semantically tagging or classifying that content based on taxonomy, which is really like a controlled vocabulary with synonyms, which expresses our context and our domain. It could be our product, our version, our services. It could be, includes the role of the person, like we talked about before. It includes the goals of that person. I'm a certain role. A certain role of a person has certain types of goals, and may have different access restrictions and other types of keywords. All these are generally, general categories of how we're going to go ahead and trying to semantically tag our content, which is going to give us a lot more power of retrieving that content. We're going to see soon. Content extractable using a RESTful semantic API. Again, we talked about this need to be able to create a semantic query based on what this content is and pull out that query in a smart way, meaning not just being able to do a search and not just being able to do a faceted search and not being able to just do a semantic query, but also being able to build intelligence or fallback rules to make sure that we're really honing in on the right content. And that basically means automatically changing the criteria of that query based on what we know about the person and based on the context. That one line is really a subject for another webinar, so we won't get onto that tangent. Analytics and metrics, that's also very important if we're talking about moving towards effective content delivery. It allows us to understand what people are searching on and what they're finding and what they're not finding. It allows us to find out what content people are using. It allows us to understand what time on the page. Okay, generally, the time on the page in some ways is very good, okay, because it keeps people on our site. Marketing people love that. But sometimes time on the page is not such a good idea. We want people to be able to find the content, read, and then kind of go on with the live. So there's like looking at the analytics about how long people are staying on the page. If they're kind of flirting around, that means they're not able to find what they want. If they're able to stay on the page a certain amount of time, that tells us something. Being able to collect ratings, how satisfied people are with that content. These are all analytics and metrics, and those are very, very important feedback mechanisms that allows us to create this better experience. So getting back to this idea of taxonomy. So taxonomy facilitates this content intelligence we spoke about. Okay, it helps us with the findability for the faceted search and SEO. It allows us to have that security element. It allows us to do recommendations. It allows us to go ahead and pull out related information from other silos based on the tagging and based on other types of rules. Okay. So if I'm sitting on a troubleshooting, or I'm sitting on a feature description or something about a certain product or version, or other type of segmentation, I can go ahead and pull out articles that have been tagged in a similar way using taxonomy mapping from my community, from KB articles from other repositories of information, pulling it out and recommending content without forcing people to go to a whole nother site. Allows us to do engagement based on targeted announcements and campaigns, like we spoke about before. Again, the taxonomy allows us to do that because the taxonomy allows us to, on the one hand, model the content and understand, wait a minute, if someone's sitting on this content, they are likely to be interested in either an announcement about a new upcoming release, about a service bulletin, about a new patch, about things like this, or campaigns, surveys and things like this, which can be very, very targeted. So taxonomy allows us to get all of this, okay? And ultimately allows us to feed these intelligent assistance tools, which we're going to get, we're kind of going to see that for last. We'll see exactly how this is going to work inside of a chatbot. A taxonomy is generally a hierarchical list of terms. Okay, there's not going to be a taxonomy workshop in 30 seconds, but generally, just to kind of get people up to speed, a taxonomy really is a hierarchical list of terms. It's generally controlled by a vocabulary, and very often you can able to define synonyms. So if I have a list of terms which is hierarchical, for example, I have a hierarchical list of products, or a hierarchical list of versions or operating systems or different types of roles. There's basically groupings of terms or groupings of subjects. Okay, what I would use to tag this content or classify my content. Okay, it's used to define your domain, your user scenarios, and your entitlement model. Now, the reason why I mentioned this defines your domain, and I kind of harp on this a little bit, is because a lot of people try to do a corporate corporate-wide taxonomy, which has a lot of good uses, but in the end of the day, what you want to make sure is that your taxonomy, whether it be corporate-wide or be narrowed down to your content set, it needs to define your domain, your user scenarios, and your entitlement model. Okay, and that's really important. Creating a taxonomy which is going to be pretty much useless to helping people retrieve content based on who they are and what they're trying to do is not serving you or not serving your customer. It becomes the basis for classification. So there's the taxonomy, which is like the controlled list of terms, and the classification is how you basically, the words that you use to tag, or the subject matter that you're using to tag your actual content. Ontology is a word that basically describes a formal definition of types and relationships between these terms. Okay, a product has a certain version. A user role has certain types of activities they might do. Okay, things like this. Building your taxonomy, generally, there's a lot of consultants out there who are really good and will help you to build a taxonomy. Our approach generally is, again, to focus on a set of typical user scenarios and then expressing those scenarios using categories based on user role, goals, and context. I always come back to that to make sure you're not getting lost in taxonomy that might not be so useful. So, for example, a sample scenario might be: I'm a system administrator. I need to integrate single sign-on to my application. I'm using identity manager, etc., and I'm using a certain protocol. Okay, something very technical. If we boil that down, we say I have our user role. He's a system admin. I have a task type. He's doing a configuration, or he's doing a deployment. Let's first take it. For example, we know his products. We know the version. We know the protocol. These define the context. Okay, and as we kind of tease out, we look at the scenario and tease out the categories of information that might be useful. These are helping us define a list of terms that are useful for defining our context. And there might be other terms, other taxonomy or keywords, what we would call, which would help find this content if someone were typing in a keyword search. For example, if someone searches for, configuring SSO, then we might want to get to this content, even though we're not using it, as part of our formal hierarchical part of our taxonomy. It still is useful from our terminology list. Another example: I'm a service engineer. I need to install a new flow meter, kind of what we saw before. I need to connect to a certain manager. Again, we can tease this out and say, what's the user role? what's the task type, installation, integration, what products they're using, the version, the protocol, user interface, and again, your domain might be completely different. It might be different set of user roles, different task types, but generally you have user roles and task types in any organization. Whether you have a product or service, whether you're using protocol as opposed to operating system, as opposed to healthcare system, as opposed to anything, anything out there. This is kind of like a methodology for helping to find scenarios and going ahead and teasing this out to ultimately build a taxonomy that's going to be useful for you. Whoops. And you can go ahead and build a taxonomy that looks something like this. Again, you can use something as simple as an Excel file, or you can use something like a taxonomy management tool. But ultimately, a taxonomy is going to have some kind of a grouping, some kind of a hierarchical grouping. And you're also going to want to make sure that you're you're creating a unique ID for each of your terms. Now, I'm going to ask you a question to the audience. Why do you think it's important to have a unique ID? Okay, so I see people raising their hands out there. So, the reason why you want to have a unique ID is because, let's say you have the name of a product and someone over there in marketing decides they're gonna change the name of that product. You don't want to have to go ahead and re-tag all your content, for example. Okay, so you always want to have an ID, and that way it allows you to change the name or change the text, add more synonyms, localize. The actual term becomes less important, and the ID allows you to always be able to keep that tagging. The next step is to classify or actually tag that content using the terms defined in your taxonomy. So using this controlled values for metadata. A best practice generally is, if possible, depending on what your content is and how the systems are using, is try to keep this classification outside of your content, meaning not requiring your authors to open up a piece of content, whether it be an XML file or a Word file or a PDF file, and having to actually put metadata in there. It's much more effective to use certain methodologies or tools to classify or tag that content in a way that the tagging stays out of the content, and that way if you want to update the tagging or change that tagging or add to the tagging, you can do that without having to physically open up all this content and to retag it. Mark, would you like to expand a little bit on this concept?
Yeah, I think, well, I'll just spend a minute on it because like the other topics you're talking, each one of these can be its own webinar, its own workshop sometimes. But I think just to think in terms of classification it's again a technical term that's not been used in regular vocabulary. It really means exactly what it says. It's what is this piece of content and what it relates to, and it's behind the scenes on being able to make this content seamless to the content user. So it's a key term used in artificial intelligence. How does a computer know what kind of apple you're talking about? Is it a fruit, or is it a company product, or is it the company itself, or there's probably a few other things we could talk about. So so the classification for us is identifying for each content module where it belongs in the taxonomy, another term we used before, really. So, and what is it really about? And it's if you're creating new content, there's tools that let you put this together. I guess a lot of what we end up doing is, what do you do with all that older material you've got? You've been creating material for years. Much of it is still relevant. Could be thousands, tens of thousands, or more pieces of material. So how do you go about it and do this classification becomes a real issue. So I mean, the area where we get involved and with Joe is really how do you automate the process of going through a piece of material and identifying what it is. And this is where you're using those terms in another webinar, artificial intelligence, and using language analysis and semantic analysis to go through a piece of content and determine for each of those terms what does it really mean in terms of your taxonomy, or the taxonomy is there. And I think what's also important to say, just going back to what Joe was saying, that it's maintaining this separate from content is very important, because a lot of the material you want to relate to, especially in the kind of systems we're talking about today, is material you don't own. It might be material that's sitting someplace on the web or some other area or a government website, and unless you keep the taxonomy information and the classification information information separate. I mean, you can't go and modify somebody else's database. So now that we have techniques to do that, that really opens it up to be able to bring in all kinds of content and put it all together. And I guess that's all. We have to move on. But just anything else you wanted to add to that, Joe? Is that?
Yeah, I think this is a good example we spoke about all the way in the beginning, where we can use machine learning and tools to, to really, at a relatively low cost. When we talk about, relative how much the cost that we're taking to actually create this content and make it available. So, this is an example of how we can use machine learning and tools to get, again, unleash the value or get them more value out of this content. Okay, great. Okay, thanks, Mark. Okay, so let's, we're going to start wrapping up, and I think we'll wrap up with some, kind of new, some kind of use cases which are, which we can, use these methodologies to get more advanced or, more valuable type of outcomes. So let's say, for example, we have, IoT or mobile apps. So let's say we're creating, troubleshooting content. Let's say the content is modeled in XML, for example, or some kind of a interactive troubleshooting type of thing, or just a topic, or just some kind of text that talks about troubleshooting. That content can be fed into the content as a service tub that we spoke about before. On the other hand, we have all kinds of devices. We have your, things that are connected to the web, whether it be your car or a Roomba or your refrigerator or whatever it's going to be these days, right? And these are connected to the internet, and a lot of these times these things have issues. They stop working. So, for example, let's say the Roomba's running around your apartment, cleaning up and vacuuming your apartment, and then all of a sudden it stops and it starts beeping. So these devices know, they generally know about themselves. They know like the device, they know the firmware, they know the status, they know the error the code that they're having. We can take this information basically, and we can go to they can communicate with an app, for example, the Roomba Control Center, let's say, and the app can basically go ahead and field this information from the device which is connected, and then build a semantic query string, kind of like we talked about before, and using that semantic query string, be able to go ahead and pull out content from that content hub, and then go ahead and feed information to the user about how to go ahead and resolve the problem. Okay, this is an example of, again, we have content is tagged in an effective way. We have devices out there that are communicating with us. We're able to take information about these devices, information about what's happening out in the world, translate that into a semantic query string, which maps, again, to our taxonomy, and use that to pull out the most contextually relevant content and getting value out of this content. Okay. Next, we talked a little bit about artificial intelligence and answer bots. So I don't know how many of you have you folks out in the audience there are using chatbots or thinking about using chatbots, or someone in your organization is thinking about chatbots, or your CEO was on some airplane and read about it in the little magazine inside the airplane and said, I want one of these things, whatever it is. Okay, so chatbots are becoming more and more prevalent. What a chatbot basically really is, or a voice, a VR, like a Alexa, these things, these are really new retrieval mechanisms, which allows us to take conversation and turn that into, ultimately really turns it into a query. Okay, so for example, someone types in, listen, my Roomba just started beeping, it says it's got an error 6, how do I get it to start? Okay, that's basically someone expressing a problem. Chatbots and artificial intelligence, Watson, all these things, what they are good at is parsing out this person's conversation and boiling it down and trying to discover what the intent of that person is, okay, which is in this case maybe troubleshoot the stop device. But also, if we're smart about it, we can allow these tools to also tease out or to extract what we call entities. So a symptom might be an entity, the error code is an entity, and then we can blend that or combine that with what we know about this person, because they logged in, because we know something about the profile. What the role of this person is, maybe what we already know what product they own. Okay, so we have a conversation, we have the chatbots and the Watsons that are able to go ahead and understand from this conversation what the intent is, and maybe with some additional accessory information that can help us to extract the right content based on this, or based on this particular intent. So this request is really turned into a semantic call, like we talked about before. Okay, very similar. A semantic, RESTful API call takes content out of that content as a service hub, because again, we saw content hub is, one of the characteristics is it's a headless API. It's able to pull out content just using an API. Okay, and that structured content that tag content can be now fed to the bot. Okay, the bot can then say, listen, your Roomba is stuck on a dark surface. If we're talking, for those of you who are doing structured information, this may be a context for a task or a procedure. Step 1, move it to a new location and press clean to restart. The bot can then say, oh, because again, the bot is designed to be conversational, or Alexa, whatever it's going to be, can say, did that work? The person says, yeah, that worked, and you can be done with it. Or it says, that person says, no, it's still broken. Okay, then try this. Step 2. Okay, again, those of you using structure is basically talking about moving to the next step. Your Roomba sensor might be dirty. This is the next thing you should try. Okay, so this is an example of how we have content that was maybe created in structure. XML, maybe did XML, for example. We have content, we have content that's tagged based on the taxonomy that is focused on, the taxonomy was built focused on scenarios and what's useful for retrieving content. Okay, what's the typical user scenarios for how I would go and retrieve this content? That's what we want to base the taxonomy on. The content's tagged based on this taxonomy. Okay, and then we're able to use this to put the whole thing together in order to pull out content that's relevant to what the situation is at hand. Okay, another example is apps. Either your, maybe like a mobile app, or it might be your application, like a web application, or anything like this. So these days, a lot of these applications, whether it be a web app or phone app or anything like this, they often use these hard-coded IDs to pull out content. And that's basically, by the way, what chatbots are doing these days. I forgot to mention this, but chatbots are not so sophisticated these days. They basically use sophisticated technology in order to parse out a question, and then they hard code to an answer. Okay, maybe some of you are shaking your heads over there, right? Or nodding your heads, really. What I want to do is get into a much more scalable situation. But getting back to the apps, again, instead of hard coding URLs into our apps or context IDs or things like this, we're able to, parse the situation of the app or what the app is looking for, build a semantic query based on that, and then pull out the content from the content as a service hub, and then be able to deliver that content to the app and to your user. Okay, so we kind of sum up, talking about, again, the whole point of this webinar is how, different methods or different concepts to think about to unleash the value and benefits from your existing content. Number 1, from a customer point of view, finding the content makes, reduces the effort of finding the content and using your products, creates a better self-service, which reduces support costs, increases your customer spending, and ultimately that we're all in business. We want our products to succeed, our products and services to succeed. Or if we're a government organization, we want people to be able to, to find our content reliable and keep coming back to us. Brand loyalty. From an employee point of view, it increases our internal productivity, whether I'm an internal service person or a support person. It improves our engagement with our employees as well as our customers. It helps increase or improve knowledge retention. From a support agent point of view, better content means higher case deflection. Higher case deflection means less tickets, means lower costs. It means, overall much more effective organization. Not only that, but, I don't know how many of you out there got a warm and fuzzy feeling when you had to call support. Okay, the statistics say that very clearly, that even people who call support and get a positive experience on support are less apt to go ahead and buy that product. Because I had to call support. Who needs to call support? I should be able to find out information on my own. So better value from your content means less tickets, less higher case deflection, and higher ability for making your content, your people happy, and your customers happy. Lower average handle time, and higher first call retention, first call resolution, because those support agents are able to find that content more easily. From a marketing point of view, it helps us to boost site traffic, content that is modular, that's consistent, that's tagged properly and is inside of our site and viewed consistently, that helps to boost your site traffic, and that makes everyone in your organization happier. It boosts your brand loyalty, higher NPS score from a customer satisfaction point of view. A lot of companies these days are measuring, they live and die in NPS, okay? Ratings and getting more feedback and better feedback on your content leads to higher NPS and higher conversion for organic content promotion. That's from a marketing and sales point of view. Okay, so all these are, I think, very clear and serious business benefits that you can be getting and your organization can be getting out of your content. And that really kind of boils down the presentation. At this point, we'll go ahead and ask if there are any questions.
All right, Joe, thank you. That was terrific and very relevant. These days, when organizations are dealing with mammoth amounts of content, the problem is certainly how to find it. And I think the term you use, contextually relevant content, puts it exactly in perspective. How do you find exactly what it is? Getting into your head. How does a computer get into your head to figure out exactly what it is that you need? And it goes across every part of the organization. I just spoke with a global organization that in the marketing area, they've calculated they have over 2 million items of customer-facing content. And that's before dealing with versions in multiple languages, and so we consider different models and different. So it's becoming more and more important, and allowing a customer to find the right piece of content certainly results in happier customers and better business. Especially these days, when people do want to do, and I think that's relevant to what you just said at the end. People do want to be able to find information themselves rather than have to call in or speak to somebody. They feel much happier when they find information themselves. I think this is all very important. Joe, what you've done is gives us a lot of insight and approaches that can be used. So thank you very much. And I'll as we turn off to Adam. Adam, do we have a few minutes? Do we have some questions that you want to put out there?
Yes, and thank you, Mark, and thank you, Joe, for this excellent, informative webinar. First question has come in, Joe, and is rather long, so just let me know if you need me to repeat anything, is how do you balance concerns over protecting user privacy related to identity versus knowing enough about them to intelligently deliver content? Do users typically opt in, get a choice, or can it be based on a long-term customer profile?
Great question. Okay, so that's a great question. So very often, we know who the person is based on their single sign-on. A lot of organizations have, people logging in as a customer, logging in as an employee, or just identifying their domain name when they log in as either a customer or employee. It's a great question. A lot of companies are, have web automation or marketing automation tools which are collecting information about people and helping to fine-tune the content experience. I think that very often these profiles are not necessarily tagged to a particular. There's not privacy information that's connected with this. Obviously, we're talking about like medical care or things like this, where there's a lot of information out there that we only want them to see because it's their own private information. That's a different case, and that's covered by a whole different set of guidelines and compliance and things like that. But generally, these tools are able to, we're talking about tagging content in a way to kind of match them with profiles without necessarily having people to, to express their privacy. And now, in Europe, for example, there's a lot of questions around new regulations about people opting in, and that's definitely something we have to think about, whether people are going to be opting in to be able to, have a personalized experience, or not. And that's definitely going to impact, I think, a lot of what we're talking about, definitely.
Yeah, and I think I think you can control privacy right down to regulations, but one of the things that happens is also the perception of what people know about you. And I mean, I'm sure you've all had the experience of going onto a website and asking something, and then 3 days later you're still seeing ads popping up for the same thing. So even though it's legal, it makes sense. I think we also have to deal. There's a fine line of when it gets too creepy to be useful. So I think there's a real issue there, and there's also the perceptive issue, the issue of perception rather, that needs to be dealt with. If a company wants to keep customers happy, they really have to worry about both of those. But those are all things that, if you think about them and you put them into your software and the analysis, then I think that all can be taken care of.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen. The next question that has come in is, you had spoken about technical documentation. Does this framework work also for content such as policies, procedures, or legal documents?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, yeah, all this type of content needs to be found quickly, meaning whether, I have a policy and we need to find that, information about the policy and what my coverage is on the website, or whether a government organization, I need to know my rights for a certain thing, or if I'm a legal document, I need to find a certain contract or something quickly. It all boils down to, everyone has a role, everyone has a goal, and they have content and they need answers that they're trying to find as quickly as possible. So I think everything we spoke about today is applicable to a very wide variety of different types of content, because again, all these types of content represent answers to questions that people have. It all boils down to who it is and what the scenarios are for how they're going to go and find that content.
Excellent. Joe, the next question has come in is, do I need to have a corporate taxonomy in place before I start with a system like this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a question we get very often, meaning a lot of folks say, okay, well, before I need to do this, I need to stop and do a corporate taxonomy. Or, and corporate taxonomies have a lot of value for a lot of different reasons, but the vast majority of companies that we work with, I would say almost all of them actually, and we work with like very, very large organizations, companies, and do not have any kind of corporate taxonomy. It's really, it really means that you need to, in any case, you need to, you might want to borrow from taxonomies if they exist, but ultimately you need to model your own content. And a corporate taxonomy generally does not get down to the level that you're going to need in order to get the most, value out of extracting, your particular content based on those particular use cases. And very often they're not, some of that, your taxonomy belongs in that corporate taxonomy and some of it might not. So there's a little play over there, but you definitely do not need to, get a full-blown corporate taxonomy, because in any case, you don't need one for this. And number two is very often the corporate taxonomy is built for, for marketing needs or something else, is not necessarily going to boil down to the level of detail that you're going to want.
And I think also another point is that having something more specialized will do the job. Dealing with stopping things till you can get a corporate taxonomy can put you off for years before you can get anything done, which has significant cost there. So we have to be careful about where the cost benefit and all that, both in money and in time and opportunities lost.
Right. That's for sure. That's for sure. I mean, we talked about leveraging the value of content. We talk about what's the cost of not leveraging that value. So the cost is, it's not a zero-sum game. It's, either you provide a better experience, or if you have the same lousy experience, people are going to start leaving. That's really what the reality of the situation these days. There's a cost to not doing anything. So.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Mark. The last question that has come in is, are there any particular products or tools that you like for storing or organizing granular content for chatbot use, etc., that will allow for language support?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, if you're talking about, when you talk about storing, I generally think of storing as I have source content, I need to store that, and then I have the delivery, making sure that content is available through APIs to the chatbot. So, as far as storing the content, generally, if you're moving to structure, which generally I highly recommend, so we're talking about, we're generally talking about using some kind of a component content management system, which is called a CCMS. A CCMS is a tool that allows you to manage your content in chunks or in modules, and be able to handle this kind of level of text of classification. A good CCMS will often allow you also to manage your taxonomy, or at least be able to ingest your taxonomy in there and use that taxonomy to classify your content inside the CCMS. Those are very useful, and a lot of companies are adopting those tools, again, for managing their modules of content. As far as pushing the content in chatbots, Zoomin is a content as a service platform, as you probably figured out at this point. We kind of like those tools. There's other types of technologies that chatbots are using. Obviously, very often those technologies are basically linking into other knowledge-based systems. The problem with the generally hard-coded, so you're going to try to find tools as much as possible to allow you to integrate with your chatbot or your other types of platforms using an API. So instead of hard-coding, be able to semantically pull out content. That's really what we call a headless CMS, or headless content as a service.
Great. Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Mark, and thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. This will conclude today's broadcast. You'll be able to access the recorded version of today's webinar in the webinar archive section of our website, located at www.dclab.com. Our next webinar will be Tuesday, February 20th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, titled Section 508 and Web Content Accessibility, Why You Should Do It, Even If You Don't Have to, with Mark Rose, President of DCL, and Stephanie Clark, the Customer Success Manager at Easy Ditto. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and have a great day.